Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaustav Bazalba. I'm a director here with RSM Australia, and I welcome you all to today's session, which focuses on AI accelerated cyber incidents and working through the response gaps today. Joining with me today is my colleague Michael Clark, also a director with RSM Australia, leading business transformation for organizations across the region. And this is going to be an extremely important topic as we start navigating through this complex space over the next 40 odd minutes. I'll start with some quick introductions from our team, and then we'll start joining as we have more people joining through over the next maybe a few minutes. We'll start navigating through the details within the slides as we go through. I specifically lead the cybersecurity, data privacy, operational resilience arm within RSM Australia, working through our clients in this specific and extremely complex technology risk space, having been in this domain for about 23 odd years now. I work with obviously a range of different executives as well as operation leaders in trying to understand some of the critical strategic priorities and how the areas around cybersecurity, data privacy, and operational resilience could be managed better in alignment with some of the better practices that we've seen worldwide. Michael, a quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Cowstab. I'm Michael Clark. As Cowstab said, I'm a director in our business transformation practice. In terms of what I do is I help organizations to transform how they're performing by looking at three different nodes, really. It's people, process, and technology. So really helping organizations to think about how they can change across those three nodes to help them through technology-enabled transformation. So the things that we're aiming to help organizations do is to become more effective, more efficient, to deliver more value to their clients and customers, to help them become more productive, and help them to gain a bit of a competitive advantage as well. So like the range of clientele that I work across is varied. So I work across governments at various different levels, across private sector and across not-for-profit as well. And the ways that we help organizations is through helping them to look at their strategies, like how do you align your technology strategy to your corporate strategy to deliver the outcomes you want to, the delivery of roadmaps, through program design and helping with the implementation of large-scale transformation programs as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And I think the intention behind today's conversation is really to bring you a diverse point of view from organizations which are transforming and adopting artificial intelligence to the implications to cybersecurity, implications to data privacy, and most importantly, the ways and means to safely adopt this as we go forward. I want to start with a specific and a clear distinction that I think sits underneath everything we're going to talk about today. Almost every organization that we speak with understands that AI has changed cyber risk. That is not the gap. Boards discuss it, executive teams have it on their register today from a risk management perspective, and I'm sure most of you could give a reasonable account of why AI matters to cybersecurity. The gap is somewhere else. The gap is essentially understanding the risk and being able to act on it under pressure. These are two completely different organizational capabilities, and the second one is the one that gets tested, unfortunately, and most importantly, at the worst possible times, and for most importantly, it's for the first time as well. So that is the thorough line for the next 40 odd minutes. Not that AI is a threat, but most importantly, when pressure is on, can our organizations today actually respond at the speed that the threat now moves? How do we get there? We are now going to go through essentially a specific logical approach to actually get there. We'll start with an overview of the landscape, which has genuinely changed. Just as importantly, what has not changed? We then move on to the response gap itself, which is essentially the heart of the discussion, and moving on then to obviously what a future focused, sensible response looks like. As we go along the way, you will also come across specific industry case studies, which will help us relate to our industry peers and understand the implications of what has gone wrong and how do organizations react to it, but most importantly, the learnings we can take away. And finally, we'll obviously take away in terms of where can we potentially make a difference to your priorities and help you as you actually start managing this critical risk along the way. More importantly, as we also go along, there are opportunities for you to contribute in terms of specific polls where I genuinely recommend that you put in your point of view. But most importantly, as questions come along, please add them to the Q&A tab so that we can actually look at them as we finish in the end. Perfect. So let's start with the cybersecurity landscape. And I think this is an important point of view to start with. The important point of view to understand is the question that I want to put on the table here today. Are we realistically ready? Not that we have controls, or not that do we just have a plan, or did we pass the audit. Ready in the sense that if this issue with respect to AI generated or AI supported or AI enabled cyber attack lands on our door at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, would the organizations have the right controls and measures? And like Michael said, from a people, process, and technology perspective, to do the right things in the right order and fast enough to matter. What we're increasingly seeing, obviously, from a threat landscape perspective, apart from what has always been the case in terms of ransomwares and the DDoS attacks, is specific critical threats which have evolved over a period of time, right from AI augmented attacks to prompt injections to extremely critical third party supply chain issues, which further compromise our critical business processes. Michael, you have been obviously working together with organizations as part of the transformation program. I'm sure this is one of the areas that gets touched upon. Any comments you would like to add here?
Yeah, thanks, Cass. Absolutely. So AI is obviously something that's really integral to transformation programs that organizations are undertaking. However, as you've pointed out already, it does, like from a couple of perspectives, really accelerate risk and open up organizations to more risk as well. So, like you said, it's really important to bake this into governance and bake that thinking into processes as well. So, as an organization is transforming, it's thinking about, okay, what are our governance processes? What are we going to get people to do differently in case we find ourselves in a situation where we are attacked from one of these vectors and one of these nodes that you've talked about? Do we have a plan in place? Do people understand their roles and responsibilities? And how do we ensure that we can keep on business continuity going, but also embrace transformation and change at the same time?
Exactly. And it's a never-ending loop, isn't it? At the end of the day, transformation, adopting the new, bringing in efficiencies within the organization is a constant struggle, a constant target that we kind of see our executives as well as obviously customers kind of work through. And it's obviously extremely important in today's day and age. And we set a very important base as well in terms of how is AI redefining the risk across the entire enterprise. The framing that matters, especially for the executives and operation leaders, is really important here because we see many organizations treating AI just as an innovation topic. It sometimes sits with the transformation team, the data team, or sometimes in center of excellence, right? But what is important is the fact that capabilities from this actually touches every part of the business. You will see 9 different domains across this particular slide, right from strategic risks, because AI obviously changes the competitive dynamics, to financial risks, because poorly architected AI destroys your value quietly over a period of time, but also legal and liability risks from generated outputs to obviously managing people and culture risks to operational risks and supply chain risks. I'm not going to walk through each and every one of them, but there is one important takeaway from this slide. The fact that AI is not just a category of risk, it is effectively a multiplier that needs to be taken that runs across every category of risks that already exists today. And that's obviously important because there is a corresponding governance consequence that is sometimes underappreciated. If AI just sits within one function with its IT or obviously the innovation team, then by definition, it is probably governed by 1/10 of a measure than what it actually should be, right? And that's where capabilities around financial risks, people and culture risks, and compliance risks could potentially miss out and are important to obviously understand and manage as well. Now, when we talk about AI, one question that quite commonly comes up is obviously, are we going to treat this as our friend or foe? And I want to be careful here because rather than talking about this as a horror story, I want to make sure that there is a balanced approach to what we actually position. When it comes down to AI and cybersecurity, the honest answer to talking it as a friend or foe is in fact both simultaneously and for the same underlying reason. On one hand, obviously, we have it as a force multiplier. AI genuinely doing valuable work in security operations today. Threat detection and response, processing volumes of telemetry that humans could not review at that speed, behavior and analytics, flagging identities, obviously from that measure to vulnerability prioritization, obviously helping teams focus on what's really important. And the last one really matters extremely importantly for organizations today, right? Because a meaningful share, as it stands for security teams across the board from a capacity perspective, goes into producing evidences and reports. And that's exactly where the value of getting time back and bringing in efficiencies can be hugely important. But at the same time, capabilities cut the other way as well. We are looking at attack surface expansion where your AI systems and capabilities themselves are a target. We have seen this as recent as in the last couple of days itself. Model inversion, prompt injection, data poisoning. They are not theoretical anymore, right? We've seen this in our own offensive security testing that more than 73% of AI integrated systems tested were susceptible to some of these attacks. There's faster and smarter threats. I probably don't need to explain it in more detail. You're looking at obviously automated phishing, deepfakes, adapting malware in real time, and most importantly, a huge governance gap. An AI-driven security decision, obviously, sometimes which you cannot audit, cannot investigate, and cannot defend. And that's an asymmetry which effectively comes into picture and which we need to hold on to, right? There are defensive benefits where obviously we require procurement, integration, and governance. At the same time, the offensive benefits with the adversary needs to open. And really, from that perspective, the asymmetry is even more important. The people who are defending capabilities need to go through obviously committees and reports and obviously reviews and obviously ensure accountability. While people who are obviously on the other side effectively just have to open a browser tab with limited answers that they have to provide from that perspective. And that's usually important. Now, let's look at, for example, further movement in terms of how this has influenced the landscape. And I think that's important to understand in terms of practice within AI. In practice today, we are looking at organizations using AI in three fairly distinct capabilities. And that is obviously important to understand because that carries extremely different risk profile. Personal productivity, I think that is self-explanatory, right from summarization to obviously comparison of documentation to drafting to obviously enterprise intelligence, obviously pulling in structured and managing unstructured data from the organization to creating decisions at scale from forecasting to demand planning. And most importantly, as we already see, agentic AI management, where obviously it changes the risk conversation because it's advising, I think is not just a person, it's taking action itself, right? The reason I separate the third category from the first two is obviously in that case, a bad AI output can automatically become a bad recommendation as well, right? An agentic AI, a bad output is an action that's already happened. And that is important to understand because our controls need to reflect that difference, which most organizations do not. Michael, again, from a transformation and perspective, again, efficiencies is one important area that organizations and executives are already targeting as part of their portfolio and as part of the new capabilities they're bringing in. What are you seeing executives focusing on when they're trying to adopt AI, especially in terms of specific areas?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kaustab. I think, look, in terms of coverage of what executives are looking to do through AI, you've given really good coverage there. It's effectively like we're looking to save time, we're looking to become more productive, we're looking to save costs, we're looking to gain a competitive advantage, we're looking to add value, and we're looking to get better intelligence on what our business actually does to help us make decisions better in terms of the direction we want to go with our strategy, resourcing decisions, etc. Across different sectors, you do see AI being used in different ways. I think with private sector, it's mainly around how are we going to use AI to help us get that competitive advantage, help us to save costs. When it comes to more the public sector and NFP side of things, you're seeing a lot of focus around how do we get our people more focused on core work and how do we help them save time. So various organizations across various sectors are at different stages of maturity in their AI adoption pathways as well. And you see what most organizations who are just starting to get into that space are looking at, the personal productivity side of things. So things like Copilot and other things that I'm sure most people on this webinar would be familiar with. And when it comes to the more sophisticated side of things, it really is starting to push into that enterprise intelligence side of things, like how do you get how do you get your processes automated and a range of other things in that space as well. And like you said, Castab, it really does, like you have to look at this from a twofold thing. And I think this is the thing that we keep impressing is there's all these business advantages that you get from using AI, but on the flip side, it does create more risk. And you need to think about how you plan for that risk and what the processes are that you put in place to ensure that you can recover from that risk as quickly as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And I think one area that stands out obviously is how speed to value chain has evolved as well, right? Extremely important trajectory for us to take care and really understand because traditional software development, has been taking years in some cases, code development months. Now we're looking at obviously robotic process automation bringing in weeks with generative and agentic AI doing the same changes in days. This is again brought in as a productive story, especially in transformation, but more importantly, the same compression in terms of time value applies to anyone building anything, including people building things aimed at obviously you. The capability that's used to require skilled teams and obviously long timeline now requires really a prompt and an afternoon, right? And that's really important to understand as a mechanism because that's going to hold a lot of value as we go through the next section. Now, let's understand the next part, which is essentially understanding how AI-driven cybersecurity risks are going to be important. And while there are seven on the slide, as I go through them, I typically like to categorize them into three specific clusters, especially thinking about from an ownership perspective. The first cluster is essentially attacks on your AI, right? Model exploits, inversions, prompt injections. Your AI systems effectively are, with unusually a large star, attack surface tracks. More importantly, lack of explainability because of black box system which can't be investigated in certain cases. The second clusters obviously attacks using AI, which are accelerating threats, automated phishing capabilities, deep fakes, malware, which is adapting. More importantly, an attacker side capability evolution, right? Spending real time on shortly. And more importantly, as we go through the third cluster, which is exposure, which is created by adoption, as you touched upon earlier as well, Michael, right? Shadow AI, where we have unvetted tools which have bypass governance in certain cases, the unknowns, the no, cause which cause visibility concerns over a period of time, and most importantly, have the potential to cause data leakage and privacy breaches, right? Because AI systems are hungry, obviously, and their data obviously goes places. There's regulatory exposure that we don't manage. Here's one thing that I do want to flag out for all practitioners. Of all the three clusters, the exposure created by the third one, potentially by the adoption measures, is one of the most entirely in your control, right? Somewhere the organizations can focus on today, and most more sometimes organizations are lacking behind as well, right? So I think that's important to consider as we go through. Now, let's look at what we've seen as well so far. So, RSM did release its cybersecurity report for 2026 quite recently as well. I highly recommend the audience on this particular webinar to reach out and essentially access it at the link you can see on the screen. But there are some extremely important observations grounded in reality, which will be of use to this particular audience. It surveyed business and obviously IT leaders across more than 150 odd organizations across Australia. And there are three findings which are really important. One, obviously, more than 35% of those organizations were obviously targeted by ransomware or a cyber extortion attempt in just the past 12 months, right? And for those which are more than 1,000 employees, larger organizations, that rises actually to more than 49%. Tells you the reality of the cyber attacks and potential risks that we face today. Out of these, when they talk about data breaches, obviously one in five have effectively reported facing data breaches during that same time period. Tells you how serious this gets. But at the same time, there's also an important point of view to consider. More than 97% of those organizations are actually expressing confidence in their capabilities to protect sensitive, confidential and customer information. The word to obviously understand and focus on is essentially this part, right? The contrary evidence that it actually exists. The gap in terms of how prepared organization feels versus what evidence is actually there on the screen, right? Significant number of organizations today expect at the same time that their budgets are going to increase in the coming year, but these are important to understand in the context of their investment areas as well, right? The fact that still remains is obviously as organizations continue to scale, this particular area obviously continues to be an extremely important area to focus on. And the fact that obviously while you have scale, that necessarily does not always buy readiness, right? Scale buys you capability, not necessarily readiness. Now, as we go through, as I said before, we'll have certain polls to go through. There is one poll that should be coming up shortly now. And the question is very simple. How confident do you feel that you are today in terms of your organization's capability to detect and contain AI accelerated cyber attack, right, before it causes business damage? I think it's important to understand, obviously, all of us have implemented controls. We have, various different stages and maturity levels. And we continuously see this changing as new models, new transformations continue to take place. So we'll take a couple of minutes to actually answer that while you see that, and we'll go through that in detail. And I'm seeing some very interesting answers there. Good portion so far, focusing on somewhat confident, which is really good to see. And useful to see as well as to how we are increasingly seeing organizations really focus on this area as part of their wider enterprise risk management capability. So we'll probably wait for 5 more seconds before we take a pause. Thank you to all those who have participated so far. Perfect. And let's take an end poll and see. I think significant number of the people who are on the call have answered this. Obviously, we've made some progress, but gaps remains, and I think that's fair. That's what we have seen across the results that we actually drove with cybersecurity results as well as earlier this particular month. And good to see the visibility and acknowledgement of where things stand as we go along as well. So thank you. Let's continue on this front. And I think the next part we want to focus on, we've understood the reasons and to focus in this area. Let's look at the response gap as it exists as well, which is really important too. Now, it's important to understand from that perspective if really the fact that we are not really talking about brand new weapons today, right? We're not talking about something that changes the complete organization response, right? That is a wrong framing, and that really kind of puts it in a very difficult perspective. Attackers in this particular case, we think they have not gotten new weapons, but they've effectively gotten faster in most cases for the ones that we already knew about. Phishing is not new. Credential theft is not new. Exploiting public facing applications are not new. Social engineering obviously has been as old as organizations. What's new is an important area to focus is obviously the speed, the scale, and the precision which the entirely familiar attacks of essentially can now be executed. And that matters enormously because that is important in how you respond. Yes, there are certain changes that we see in terms of novel attacks as well, but it's not the majority, right? And because if majority of the novel attacks were the ones which are the case, that would obviously require brand new tooling. And the answer is obviously not brand new tooling as well. The answer is essentially how do we actually manage this better? Familiar attacks executed at speed essentially makes important as a point of view to consider because those were areas for which our response were never designed to match. That's a whole different issue, right? Now, let's look at in terms of why it changes the existing playbooks, right? It's important to understand this because if the playbook have to change, there are 6 areas that we think it effectively has to focus on. I'll start with naming them, but effectively focus on those which are the most important and the toughest one to really manage. We have secured by design. We have obviously lifecycle based controls. We have AI threat modeling. We have explainability and auditability, continuous monitoring and validation, and most importantly, cross functional governance. But the two hardest ones, essentially, in my experience, are obviously the first and last. Secured by design, because obviously it becomes a wider timing and obviously a much more bigger point of view to implement rather than just a technical one. Security, privacy, and ethical considerations then obviously have to be embedded across this particular AI system which is implemented and not just reviewed and once it's been built as well. At the same time, cross-functional governance, again, it's an organization-wide thing point of view to actually address, right? So it's always harder when obviously it's not just a technical problem and a wider group of stakeholders which actually need to manage that, which have different functions, different vocabularies, and most importantly, different lines, right? Most important point of view to notice is obviously out of the 6 shifts that we're talking about, only really 2 of them are technical. 4 of them are actually governance and process related points of view, which is what Michael mentioned earlier. Now, in terms of obviously the next couple of slides, I'll probably go through them quite quickly because what I want to focus on is important. You see specific areas in terms of how cybersecurity playbooks have been changed and how certain capabilities have been commoditized over a period of time. And the word commoditized becomes important, right? We've seen scale where thousands of targets have been researched, profiled, and contacted. We're seeing speed, obviously from reconnaissance to weapons attack perspective. We're looking at believability improving, right? From perfect language to correct context to obviously cloned voices and faces. And most importantly, adaptability with payloads and messaging that change faster, right? None of these are essentially extremely sophisticated attacks. These are available today as a service as well, right? And that's extremely important to understand because that has collapsed the time to react and the hierarchy as we go through too, right? In terms of obviously moving through the next couple of slides, right, from access and execution to going through engineering and reconnaissance, it's extremely important to look at what is changing in terms of established techniques, right, from MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is the industry taxonomy. 2 reasons, again, need to important to understand is the fact that every single technique on these slides is effectively a known technique. There's nothing new that the security team and the audit teams today haven't seen before. The framework that we used to categorize some of these particular attacks did not need a brand new category of AI. But what has changed across these has effectively changed is in terms of the effort, the skill, and the time that each of these technique requires. The techniques that used to preserve a small number of capable actors today requires a much smaller, focused effort, right? If there's one thing to take away from these two slides is the fact that the threat catalog necessarily hasn't changed, but the economics of these threat catalogs has changed completely. And how does it matter? I think that's a great point of view. I'll probably hand it over to Michael in terms of how does it matter from a growing response perspective.
Thanks, Cowstab. I think you've given everybody a really good sense of exactly how AI accelerated threat is really speeding things up. And this is a simple graph to show one of the points that you were highlighting just before, in that the threat curve is steepening quite fast and much faster than a lot of organizations can actually respond to. And as you pointed out before, so AI attacks, they're becoming more frequent, they're faster, they're much more sophisticated as well. So reconnaissance that used to take skilled attackers days now happens in minutes. And also we've seen phishing content now, which is far more sophisticated than what it used to be. So, it's not the prince asking you for money in your bank account anymore. It's something that's very compelling. There's no issues with bad grammar or anything like that. We're also seeing, like, it's not just the text-based phishing side of things, but also, video deep fakes and other things to authorize payments and bypass, the standard verification steps that have been put in place, which were reliable. That's all changed. So from the transformation work that I step into, when we're talking to executives, they're not really talking about it from the technical perspective. The questions or the things that they're asking generally focus on the four nodes that we've got across the bottom, which is, how quickly can we make a decision in response to understanding or knowing when one of these threats comes into play. So it's not so much, did we have an incident response plan, but, getting execs to think about when the actual pressure is on, can they get the right people in the room or on a call to make a decision then and there? Who actually owns escalation and approval. So having a real clear understanding of who plays what responsibility in that decision. And that needs to be clear and it needs to be genuinely tested in play as well. It's one thing for it to be on an organization chart, but it's another thing for people to genuinely understand it. Having some trust in the information and ensuring that all teams have access to that information as well who are involved in the decision. And lastly, can we actually keep operating? So, the organization itself doesn't just stop because you've had this cyber attack. It's how do we keep the organization going? How do we keep that business continuity going to ensure that we can continue our key business or recover to continue our key business as quickly as we can? I think that's, regardless of whatever sector these executives are from, they're the questions that they tend to raise and surface when it comes to, I guess, recovery and cyber threat.
Thank you, Michael. And I think those four questions are definitely quite relevant and based upon the roles that each of you effectively plays within the organizations, right from board members to operational leaders to obviously technology leaders. I think each of them brings a specific, unique perspective that needs to be considered based upon where you are in terms of the maturity scale of the controls and what needs to be done to manage this particular risk. And as it goes along across each of those categories we have seen earlier. Now, let's go to the next slide and we'll kind of make this concrete and start applying these based upon what we've seen so far with one of or the first of the three case studies we have. This one effectively is about AI training data, and it is one that obviously would be very relevant to anyone with a legal, privacy, or a procurement role. The organization in this case was a US-based organization which built a facial recognition software system, which is actually effectively by scraping more than 3 billion photographs which are available publicly. Facebook's, the Instagrams, the LinkedIn's, obviously, without the knowledge of consent of the people in those images. It was then obviously sold further to a database, to a law enforcement and to financial institutions and commercial customers, including to those within this region. The regulator, after a joint investigation with obviously its counterparts in other regions as well, did determine that this had breached the Australian Privacy Act. So, well publicized case from that perspective, and specifically in this case, it had the APPs, as we all are well aware of, which were breached from that perspective, and especially found out that sensitive information, biometric information, was collected without notice. And obviously, while it had not been collected by lawful or fair means, obviously it had failed to notify the individuals about their images. The company was ordered to stop collecting facial images and biometric templates, and obviously to destroy everything it had collected within 90 days. Now, there are certain key aspects that are genuinely important for us to understand as key takeaways, right? Any AI trained or obviously publicly available data may still obviously constitute a breach from a privacy perspective if it especially contains privacy information which is collected without consent. And obviously, the fact that publicly accessible does not always mean freely usable. Biometric data, most importantly, as we know, when we start adopting AI capabilities, has to be given effectively the highest protection tiers in terms of controls. Audit, when it obviously an assessment, so it does need to look at the training data sets. You cannot also just outsource that obligation. We need to know where the training data sets came from, what was the consent that was obtained, and can we evidence that? And most importantly, even if you're using a vendor system, we do need to verify how it was collected where possible, right? We cannot outsource that obligation. And that is extremely important as we start having these capabilities for wider use within the organization. Now, we've seen essentially the importance of some of these points of view. We've also seen the gap that exists today, especially for organizations, and obviously the potential implications of what happens if we don't do that. How can we manage that better? What can we effectively do to manage this particular gap as we go through? We start with obviously a point of view regarding five specific areas that the organization, across every sector for that matter, should focus on. First, obviously, adopting appropriate risk frameworks, which are AI centric. The NIST risk management framework is obviously one of the most widely used starting point. It gives you a structure which helps you identify specific AI threats, right from model poisoning to data leakage, and helps you, most importantly, integrate that in your existing governance rather than having it run in parallel outside. Second, obviously, securing the life cycle end to end. Controls right from data ingestion through to training and deployment to ongoing monitoring and governance are important. Audit trails right from obviously model inputs to outputs to obviously restricting that access that we see across training data and obviously those particular models as we have, where we treat the model as an asset within the life cycle, the same way as you would treat any other critical system. Third parties and fourth parties, let's not forget that. Obviously, especially in the financial sector, we have very clear expectations when especially as it's managing critical service providers and those impact critical business processes. But most importantly, as the role that they play across every sector today. We do need to ensure appropriate controls from vetting vendors to open source models to obviously know how these are embedding vulnerabilities in our existing attack surface, wherever obviously possible, having those attestation from a security perspective. Our incident response playbook, and that becomes quite critical because that is an area traditionally not focused on AI, but it's important to ensure our resilience measures are not forgotten as part of the work that we do towards managing AI related risks, right? Because it actually is one of the few areas that connects everything that we have discussed so far, including the last section. Your playbooks, which were almost certainly written for a threat model, which did not include obviously model inversion and hallucination driven drivers, obviously now have to change and have to include the scenarios. And let's not forget the last, which is essentially looking at your human oversight measures, where we actually connect everything that we bring together and ensure obviously manage that in an appropriate manner. The phrase that I want to leave behind is obviously the fact that we want to have secure by design and governed by default. I think that's an important area to focus on as we go through. Michael, you want to cover the organization readiness and governance aspect, which I'm sure is one of the key areas as we start making decisions at an executive and an operational level.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Cowstab. Picking up on that last point that you were making around human oversight, this slide is really showing how organizational readiness and technical readiness are two different, distinct things, and you really need both operating well. So you can have an organization with very mature detection and response tooling, but which will help you know that you've got some kind of threat that you need to respond to, and that something is happening. but it doesn't actually tell you how to respond or who needs to do what. So what you're looking at on this slide here is effectively the operating model that needs to exist around that executive decision point on, when to enact and how to enact on your response plan, and the six functions that need to come together quickly. So I'll talk through those very quickly. You've got the service owner, so they'll be involved to think about the service and delivery impact. You've got your IT and cyber area, obviously running the detection and the technical response operations, and ensuring that there's some continuity of services and that recovery is managed really well from that technical perspective. You've got your risk area assessing the impact, the controls and the exposure. You've got your legal area thinking about what are the regulatory obligations and privacy, and how does this threat sync against it. Um, and then finally, you've got communication. So it's like, how do we engage with the public on what's happened, the media, and what do we tell staff as well? So each of these functions can do their job well in isolation, but the response can still fail. And that's why you need them to all come together to work out what to do as soon as you've had a threat respond. So this shouldn't be a sequential thing. They need to come together at the earliest possible moment. Down the bottom are some of the four key things that you really need to think about and consider as part of this operating model when it comes to decision making for cyber response. So decision rights, who can actually approve action, not who's nominally accountable on an org chart, but who has the real delegated authority in the moment. Your escalation triggers. So what's the threshold? Like, when do you mobilize your plan? These need to be crisp and clear, because ambiguity here can cost you time. Trusted reporting, we've talked about this before, just important how it is to ensure that everybody has the same access to real-time information. Because if you've got all those different areas of the business that we've talked about there, accessing different information, then they're not starting from the same point. And of course, the recovery playbook. So how do we still keep operating? How do we keep doing our BAU work? How do we keep delivering to our customers, to our client base, whilst we're recovering and responding and making this decision as well?
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Again, as we go through another case study to essentially focus on, as we go through, specifically focusing on an ERP transformation case that you've been working on, Michael, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is, Castab. And whilst this isn't a cyber incident as such, really just wanted to show the difference between confidence and capability. So just for some context around this case study, recently been working on an ERP transformation with a mid-sized organisation, and we went through a go live process for their new ERP system to come live. Now, and as part of this, we had a pretty detailed go live criteria. We had a range of assurances from the vendor and that delivery partner sign off, and also had the board across what needed to be done by those nodes that we're talking about here. So functional, data, security testing, and a range of other things. And while we did testing, I would highlight that the testing we did, or the user acceptance testing, wasn't done in what I would call match-like conditions. And that's where I see one of the key failures, is that there was confidence built up across the organization that we were ready to go live, because we had the documents in place, we had processes in place, and we had assurances from the vendor, and we had done some testing. However, that testing, to use a sporting analogy, what we practiced in, the environment we practiced in, was nothing like the match environment. So what happened when we went to the go live and we went into the match environment? We were nowhere near as prepared as what we thought we would be. So when the system went live at actual full production scale, there were a bunch of issues, none of which were absolutely catastrophic, but there were a bunch of issues that actually impacted the corporate area's ability to provide BAU type services, and we had to focus quite heavily on a lot of that recovery work. So I guess the main point and the parallel I'm trying to draw here is that you can have documentation in place, you can have things down on paper, you can do simple desktop exercises and tabletop exercises, but you need to test yourself and your ability to respond in real time, match type conditions to actually have the confidence that you can respond at the speed that you need to when you are in a crisis.
Fantastic point there, Michael. And again, the confidence versus capability point was extremely well illustrated in the RSM cybersecurity report as well recently, which kind of talked about the confidence in terms of the capabilities and controls while the readiness to really face a cyber attack there, right? So I think very well said there. The next four slides effectively focus on specific assurance takeaways that all of you can effectively take, right? What can we take away today? What can we and how can we apply something today? And what I've used is something which is publicly available as data points, the Institute of Internal Auditors specific topical requirements, which you can apply to and use as a great reference, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it is data privacy, whether it is resilience, or whether it is third-party risk management, right? Specifically, for example, from a adversarial cybersecurity risk perspective, we now have a defined attack taxonomy for AI system, which did not exist a few years ago, right? From prompt injections to model inversions to obviously evasion attacks. Again, most importantly, model supply chain attacks as well. The practical implication, obviously, your IT asset inventory now needs to include your AI models, your APIs, and your monitoring needs to cover all these endpoints as well in terms of who can query and what can be modified and what can be retrained. Same thing then applies when you start applying these from a privacy lens perspective, right? There's one important and very useful checklist that I've included for all of you to potentially use. The headline again, very simple. Has a privacy impact assessment been done for the systems we are adopting, we are applying today? Do we know the data flow maps? How does personal information get managed across the entire life cycle? Do we have the consent? And the one that the most organizations fail, that are we notifying individuals when AI is used to make a materially important decision about them? Right? Again, privacy becomes quite a critical element, Michael, as part of adoption specifically. Any specific call outs that you would want to highlight to the audience here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we have on this slide down the right-hand side, they're all the really key systems that, all the key questions that executives need to ask themselves from that perspective of if we introduce this new AI system as part of a transformation. Do we have all these questions covered on the right-hand side here? And I won't read through them all. In making that decision around, okay, what's going to happen to data? What's going to happen to our client data? What's going to happen to our customer data? What's going to happen to our staff data as part of using this new AI system? Do we have the right security? Do we have the right protections in place? And if we do have a breach, if there is a leak, how do we go about responding to that? And how do we go about limiting the threat and limiting the damage out of that as well?
Right. Thank you, Michael. And we move on to obviously third-party dependencies as well. Again, extremely critical to understand the key risks as well as control considerations when you have an AI-related supply chain. The thing I would want to obviously still draw out is obviously the concentration risks that many organizations we see today have not mapped out. A small number of foundational, obviously, model providers now sit underneath a huge amount of obviously enterprise software, sometimes several layers down, as we can keep discovering from an asset management perspective, and sometimes products that you did not procure as AI products directly, right? So I think it's important to consider. And finally, and most importantly as well, is obviously resilience when it comes down to AI-enabled business processes. Let's not forget that. One of the questions I would leave with obviously operational audience who would be there in this particular call specifically is for every processes where you have either embedded AI, what happens if that AI related system or application or capability becomes unavailable or it degrades or it's confidently wrong? If the answer is obviously the fact that we haven't tested yet, then obviously we have a major availability risk sitting there within our productivity initiative. And again, to help out, what can be used as a good reference today? The IIA related topical requirements are a wonderful reference to get started with, along with other frameworks as we go through. Now let's come to a final case study as we go through, as we start applying these, particular elements as well. This one was a large multinational technology conglomerate. Again, it applies to how organizations today are adopting AI and the risks sometimes that materialize because of that. Within about 20 days of adoption, they realized there were about three separate incidents. One, an engineer pasting proprietary source code from an internal, measurement system into the tool. Second, someone actually putting a code for identifying defective equipment, asking for optimization. And third, somebody actually putting an internal meeting request, asking it to generate the minutes. Each of them essentially not doing anything malicious, but none of them essentially being careful as well, right? The organization obviously ended up restricting access and developing a policy, something that should have been done from the start. But what do we take away from this? Approval is not necessarily governance on its own, right? The tool was sanctioned. What was missing was a guidance on what could go wrong, how to use this appropriately without sensitive data being uploaded. Your smartest people obviously may not be your safest people, most importantly, right? We are highly educated engineers and obviously experienced people with a strong security culture. But again, expecting them to intuitively understand and reason about and know, most importantly, your data residency and confidential data management requirements is not by default. It is a hope. And most importantly, sometimes when this kind of things happen, the exposure is unrecoverable. What we think, obviously, and take away is obviously different from data incidents, and that's very important to manage across potential regulatory implications, right? Now, one thing that I want to take away as we start getting into the final few slides is the fact that as AI systems and capabilities, they continue to evolve, they continue to become more capable. Our focus areas needs to be the corresponding adversarial resilience because it is important as the intelligence itself, right? Now, there's obviously working together with leaders forms a core part of what you do, Michael, right? As part of either adoption of new capabilities or obviously evolving and bringing in new capabilities and features into solutions within their enterprise. What are leaders thinking now? What should they really focus on?
Yeah, thank you, Kaustab. Look, I think from a leadership perspective, it's just bringing it back to having a policy is not resilience, having a response plan is not resilience, and having a governance forum that meets quarterly is not resilience either. They're all useful, but none of them are sufficient on their own, because none of them are tested under conditions that actually matter. So they are key parts of it. However, you need to also, like we're talking about before, practice in match type conditions. So the questions I'd encourage every executive team to be asking themselves are outlined here. So how have we actually tested this, and how have we actually tested what our response looks like? So not just a tabletop type exercise in theory, but something that's actually stress tested, getting people actually doing it, measuring yourself to time for a fast moving scenario and seeing how quickly you can respond and trying to get that as close to what the real life environment, real life threat would look like. Do we know unambiguously who actually owns the decision when something goes wrong? No assumptions here. You need to absolutely know crisply who's got what responsibility from a governance perspective. Uh, do we trust the information that we're going to receive in the moment? Are we receiving that in real time as well? And can we move quickly enough given how fast AI now acts as well? It's really compressed the time frame for everything, from that initial compromise to material operational impact. Just given time, I'll stop there. But those 4 points, I think, in sum, really summarize what we've got on the slide here.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you. And as we start coming to the end, I think one more poll, I definitely request audiences to respond. If there's one thing that you could fix over the next 90 days to close your AI-related accelerated incident response gap, what do you think you would actually focus on? Is it the detection and triage capability? Is it your incident response playbooks? Is it your decision making? Is it your board level understanding of the risk itself? Where do you again, would love to understand where things are. And again, we see a wide range of responses coming in. Probably give it 5 more seconds. Thank you to all those who are responding. Fantastic. Let's end the poll now and see what the responses are again. I think a wide range of points of views, right from investing in detection and response, where we are seeing a range of solutions and capabilities out there, to automated decision making as it stands, and obviously cross-functional capabilities. Where I definitely would want everyone to essentially start looking at as well is more importantly, a wider awareness of the risk itself. Every organization is different. We don't want to apply a vanilla approach. We want to understand where do we uniquely stand based upon the nature of our operations, the industry regulation that we work in, and what is really the concern or risk, as we say, that it applies to. Again, going back to what we had discussed earlier, not putting AI as a risk category, but how does it actually multiply what we already have on our risk registers and identified risks? Let's start getting into a few final slides as we kind of go through. At the end of the day, we have already seen a range of different capabilities and points of view, the fact that we mentioned as well, and I think Michael stressed upon it. that AI models today have compressed the exploit by weaponization, right? You're seeing a compressed time to exploit and obviously going from years to potentially days. There's certain areas definitely we want to ensure that you want to focus on and that it actually matters as we go forward. Number one, we want to ensure we are using AI-powered tooling wherever possible to scan the codes and pipelines and find them before someone else is done, utilizing capabilities such as automated vulnerability discovery. We harden the basics, we start testing them at scale. We obviously ensure egress filtration, deep segmentation within our networks, our asset management. More importantly, let's get the basics clear. Do we even know what the assets are, what systems are, what AI capabilities we are using, and then test it using appropriate adversarial simulation where possible. Let's look at continuous vulnerability operations as where possible to ensure that we have a continuous cycle, managing this as a continuous process rather than mismatching by definition. And identity verification to ensure AI verification and privileged access management are continue to monitor, along with areas such as segmentation and zero trust management to manage the blast radius. Now, we've covered in terms of areas that we've gone through, in terms of the importance, in terms of what we effectively see as a clear response gap, and more importantly, the good practices, the takeaways that we can essentially focus on. I want to end with a quick overview in terms of how we can potentially assist all of you in terms of getting started, right? There are four specific service details that I have on the next 4 pages. I'm not going to go through each one of them in detail, but really to give an overview right from conducting AI specific governance audit, understanding your governance practices against a structured framework, to really helping you understand your strategy measures, helping you build a roadmap in terms of actually what should be your priorities, well aligned to your existing wider enterprise management priorities, to helping you understand your third party risk assessment measures and developing aligned policies and procedures along to them. If any of these are useful and something that you're thinking about, feel free to let us know. Feel free to reach out, and more than happy to bring our experience together as we go through some of those particular next steps. At the end of the day, to really, finalize, come to the final slide, and before we end this, what we have seen so far as critical risks, what we have seen so far as what are the areas of concern is something that we see across every organization, something that we see across organizations as they continue to mature, bring in new capabilities across a revolution cycle, but they can also be managed with the right structure, with the right controls in place, applied in a manner which is well aligned to your strategic priorities. If any of these are something that you actually are thinking about, is something that makes sense and well aligned to what your risk management focus on, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to let us know how we can help you, and we're more than happy to start aligning those appropriate requirements to your capabilities and priorities. Michael, any closing words for the audience?
I think you've summed that up really well, Kaustab. I think the only final word I'd have, and I feel like it's been covered a lot through the presentation, but it's always good to, I think, reiterate this one, is that it's not just a technical problem, it's not just an IT problem in terms of how you respond to cyber incidences. It's really key and core to have that holistic organizational view baked into your governance to understand how you should push forward in a way that's best for your organization.
Perfect. That's it, everyone. Hopefully, this has been useful to you in terms of coverage across this particular critical area. Thank you for taking the time to go through this and being patient with us as we went through a significant amount of material. We're happy to take in any few questions. I think we have about 5 minutes remaining.
Yeah, so I can see on the chat, Cowstab, that we've got two questions. I think the first one would be for you, and the second one would be for me. Happy to
Okay,
put the first one out to you. So we've got a
sure.
we've got a question here from Kushal, and sorry if I've mispronounced your name. What, in your view, on OpenAI breaching Hugging Face? What is your view? Sorry, what is your view on OpenAI breaching Hugging Face, and what should be prevention strategy in such cases?
Yeah, I think I would be surprised if I didn't expect that particular question today, but I think it's way too early to start commenting in terms of obviously points of view at this point in time. But I know there is a formal detailed review that's underway, and both these organizations are working together with each other to effectively understand what's happened, right? We know it started with the test environment. At the end of the day, obviously having a wide scale implications for Hugging Face as well. But at the end of it, it's important to understand what we discussed at the start of this particular webinar. The fact of time to exploit, the fact that capabilities are evolving at a much faster speed of which we do not have visibility. But at the same time, how many organizations today really have the basics covered, whether it's segmentation, whether it's obviously privileged access management, or whether it's really asset management, that understanding of what kind of AI systems we have today. This is obviously with two large organizations who are really focused on AI. What about those organizations who are not that technology centric, but are utilizing or thinking about bringing in AI capabilities uh, to actually bring in efficiencies or new features? Again, getting the basics right is important, and we have discussed more those controls. Getting started there is always good at the end of the day. Now, let's not forget the fact we are never going to be, and we are not trying to achieve a perfect response, right? The idea is not perfection. The idea is persistent, specific, focused efforts to make sure that we are able to manage and are aware and visible of our risks and controls is what should be focused on. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Kaustab. The second question that we have is in the ERP transformation case example, what was missing before go live, or what would you do differently if you had your time again before go live? So I'll field that one. I think very quickly, one of the concepts that we talked about a bit is certainly that idea of ensuring that you're conducting, like practicing or testing scenarios in match-like conditions or in conditions that are as close to what you're going to experience in real time during a proper threat. And in this example, like really what the load is going to be on the system, what the load is going to be on people when you're actually using your ERP system in full. So I think the mistake or the shortcoming that had been made is we had a lot of written assurances from the organization delivering the system, and we had, testing to look at, I guess, the functionality side of things, but it hadn't been loaded up as you would in normal or in best practice UAT to an extent where it's being used in full scenarios. You're testing the workflows end to end, and you've also got it working with the load of data that you'd be expecting it to work to. So in really simple terms, is it's doing UAT that is akin to match-like conditions. So yeah, thanks for your question there, Jess. Kaustab, there's one more here that I think we can probably just squeeze in. It's from Luzanne. So it's how do you see the AI regulatory landscape changing with the recent Albanese announcements on AI use?
I think that's a very important one, and I'm sure all the industries are thinking about it as well. So, as part of the wider cybersecurity strategies, I think that's one of the key areas that already has been suggested as one of the key areas to focus on as part of the industry consultations, as we see. More importantly, across every regulated industry, whether it's a APRA regulated industry or a SOC regulated industry or others as well. Now, AI related specific risks are already being seen as one of the key areas for executives and obviously boards to focus on. It's already a question on the table for organizations and boards to really start reviewing and start monitoring on a regular basis. And what we potentially are very likely to see as we go forward is more specific and focused controls and expectations from boards from a behavior perspective and appropriate regulatory changes to manage that. We are also going to expect essential eight changes, as we've all potentially already heard. There is also a likelihood that we might see some changes from that perspective because that is a very real risk as it stands to organizations today. Let's see how it goes. But again, there's regulators and boards are already thinking about it. More importantly, to make sure our behaviors and controls are already aligned to it.
Thanks, Kaustab. That's all the open questions that we had in the chat.
Perfect. I think if there are no further questions, again, thank you everyone for joining us. I definitely recommend accessing the RSM 2026 Cybersecurity Report and reaching out to us if you have any questions or areas we can support. More importantly, we really appreciate everyone's time to join us today, and we hope we actually get to talk again sometime soon on this critical topic. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.